hop on this 2-hour call or on this 1-hour call, can I do it in 15 minutes and will it be impactful for my company? Or can I just say no and will it be impactful for my company in a good or a bad way? So understanding really what that effort going in, but what the potential output of doing something is, I think that's a very powerful decision maker for me in terms of what to put on my calendar. Because obviously, like, I could fill it up in no time with, all these calls. But the reality is, how many of those are going to turn into potential revenue? How many of those are going to turn into a partnership? How many of those are going to turn into a feature? So I think it's, this notion of predicting, or to the best of your ability, of course, how a phone call, and then making some room in your calendar for those surprises where it's like, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I'm going to take it anyway. I try to limit that to Fridays. So on Fridays, I take my spontaneous calls, and I really try to say, I'm open to the world right now. But the rest of the week, I have to be a lot more intentional. And I also think that blocking a day or 2 days a week off entirely of having calls is really helpful, just to do focused work, because when you are a bootstrapped founder, so much depends on your ability to follow up. And I learned this lesson the hard way, where I did in my first year not follow up enough with like calls that were going really well or projects that could have potentially come to light, but didn't, because I just didn't have the time, and I kept taking calls rather than saying, okay, I'm going to put my head down, write that proposal, write it exactly how they want it, do exactly what they wanted as follow-up. And then, over time, that's really what gets your traction going, your ability to follow up. So I think blocking 2 days a week off for just follow-up is super powerful. And then keeping 2 days a week and saying, okay, these calls are going to be intentional. How long do they need to be? And I don't need to be afraid of saying, this is great. This call has been wonderful. It's gotten everything that we've covered everything that we wanted to cover. And then you end the call. And that's like, we have if you set a 1-hour call, you could fill that hour up. But is that hour really intentional and like impactful ultimately? Probably not. Like, you could do it in maybe, 30 minutes. So schedule the call for 30 minutes and then leave a little wiggle room so that you can go slightly over, but at least you'll know that moment of time has been used wisely, and go for what has, low effort and high impact first, and then work your way towards, high effort, high impact. And then honestly, if it's high effort, low impact, consider not doing it at all.
Right. This is what I refer to as the art of filtering.
Yeah, yes. Prioritization, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and it is an art.
It's a tough one.
Yes, it takes a lot of experience, because we all make mistakes constantly. Like, this was a bad week. I was not that productive.
Exactly. And, I think this is probably where I kind of struggle a lot, is this notion of productivity and feeling guilty about it. Like, sometimes the other day I had a client was in the city I'm currently in, and he's like, let's go out for lunch and let's, talk about some of the details of the project. And I said, great. I blocked 2 hours off my calendar for this lunch. Lunch took about 5 hours. And part of that was, yes, most of it was talking about work and things like that and the details of the engagement. But then a lot of it was actually just like talking and, getting to know each other and things like that. And, I got back from that and I'm like, I just spent 5 hours of my day on this. Like, I felt so guilty. And the reality was like, actually, now this person is continuously, saying, let's move this forward, let's accelerate the speed. So was it worth it? Probably, because it's leading to a faster paced engagement than I anticipated. And sometimes, we trip ourselves out and we add a lot of guilt as founders about the way we use our time. But I think, like, if you trust and you've developed this practice of being a good judge of time management, then I think even on those days where you actually take those extra 3 hours, or you even take, the afternoon off, then it starts to feel a little better. And I think managing guilt is probably where I kind of fall short. And I would say it's the third layer of saying I can manage my energy, I can manage my time, and I can manage my guilt. And I think guilt is the hardest one to get over, especially in the early days when you feel constantly that you need to be productive 100% of the time, and that's simply not true, and it's not sustainable, right? So understanding how to manage guilt is probably where I think I fall short, but also I think we all need to prioritize a little bit.
Well, I think that's true, especially of women, and especially given the multiple roles that women oftentimes have, even as entrepreneurs, whether they're married, have a partner, have children, have older parents. It's always a juggling act. So you're absolutely right. Managing the guilt is also critically important. So to that end, I did want to circle back on some of the software that you mentioned, because I thought that was important in case listeners didn't catch it. But to that end, let's just talk briefly about your self-care, because that is obviously as important as all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we all have to be a little bit intentional about. And I think part of that is also not saying like there are specific routines you need to follow in order to self-care. I think it's really the core of self-care comes from understanding you and what refuels you. And you know, for some people that might be, you know, watching a cooking show on Netflix or doing the cooking, or, you know, it might be going out with your friends. Like understanding what your personal form of refuel is, I think that's super important. So the first thing I ever did, I think that really put me on this journey of self-care, was I started mind mapping. And I'm a really intense mind mapper. I do it often. I preach it often, because it's really, you know, based on this assumption that you don't truly know yourself. And there's a lot in your subconscious that you don't fully process, because as a founder, you just don't have the time to do it. So taking, you know, 20 minutes and jotting down everything that comes to your mind about certain categories of things like self-care, I think it teaches you a lot about, you know, what's weighing on you in the back of your mind, and what ways you really would find fulfillment. And so I, you know, mind map in different contexts, like at night with a glass of whiskey, or at night with a glass of tea, or, you know, mug of tea. But mind mapping I find is really healing for me, because it realigns a lot of like what's lying in my mind and what's giving me a little bit of anxiety. So that's really helpful to me. I think exercise is, you know, super helpful. I love dancing and music. And for me, falling in love with music is something that I did as a child and has always been a part of my life. But I think now I view it as a way of like a temporary, very meaningful break. Like if I get lost in a really good song that I love, be it sing along to it, dance to it, like not think of anything but that song, it feels like a break. And it might be a short break. And so it's really healing to me to just take a moment and like really enjoy a good song. So I've taken to doing that very often lately. But I think, and I care a lot about skincare and beauty, and clean beauty specifically. So I spend some time reading up on ingredients and things that are good for me, and then recommending products to my friends. I keep an Excel sheet for all my friends on like clean beauty brands. So that's like fun for me as a, you know, a way to think about things that I enjoy, but not necessarily think about things, you know? So I think, but that's fueling for me. So I think it's really about doing this mind mapping and understanding what refuels you as a person, and then building, you know, space and time intentionally each week for that.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, those were all excellent suggestions. So now I want to switch gears and pose a last question to you, which is, if you could wave a magic wand, what is the one thing that drives you crazy that you wish someone would find a solution for that would help your productivity and sanity?
Wow. That's a tough one. I think, you know, a lot of what takes up my time that drives me crazy and gives me a lot of anxiety is this like documentation component of like all of these manuals have to be created, because as you sort of, you know, you're in this bootstrap mode, you're doing everything yourself, a lot lives in your own head. I think something super useful would be, you know, someone that can help pull that out of your head and start creating these like playbooks essentially, so that as you're able to start outsourcing to freelancers or bringing someone into your team, that, you know, it lessens the degree to which you have to take time in the beginning. So I think like, yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want something or some product or some service or someone that can just pull it out of my head and create these playbooks for who's coming in next.
Got it. Okay, well, that's excellent. Thank you. I can't believe it, but Lucía, we are out of time already. I feel like, honestly, I could have chatted with you for like another hour on this. Your insightful hints were great, and I hope our listeners found them to really be helpful. Now, if anyone in our audience would like to reach out to you or learn more about your company or how they can reach you, where should they go?
Thanks again for having me, Fernanda. And if anyone does want to reach us, you can find us at www.emergetechlab.com. That's emergetechlab.com. And we can also be reached via email at hello@emergetechlab.com. That's hello@emergetechlab.com.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much again for joining us. And thank you to our listeners. We'll look forward to having you back next week for another great show on Startup Hacks. Thank you for joining Startup Hack. Tune in next week for more interviews. We have another great show you won't want to miss on the secret female founder strategies that can save you time and money when building your business. This podcast is brought to you by Women Entrepreneurs Global, the first startup studio and digital do-it-yourself startup platform for women. For more information on our guests, this podcast, and many other female founder programs, please visit womenentrepreneurs.global. I'm your host, Fernanda Carapina. See you next week.